The Paper80 blew my mind. Literally, I involuntarily made a bodily noise when I saw this RGB implementation. So, holy shit. This is a keyboard that had a concept, and personally I believe it nailed it beautifully. This is inspired by the Oscar award-winning Disney short film Paperman, and this TKL really nails that aesthetic of a paper airplane. This thing shines with the lights on or off, so let's unplug it so you can see how it looks with the lights off. And it looks great, that deep red with the chamfered edges on the paper airplane badge above the right arrow. Is a PVD weight with the brass in the middle, and the back weight really looks great with those angles, just like the folds of a paper airplane. And with the lights on, it's a completely different story. It looks amazing. There you go. See the RGB all the way around, even in the front, and the badge lights up. I really like the RGB implementation because it's very unique and it helps it stand out in the crowded keyboard market today. This is something you buy simply just for the clean aesthetic, nothing over the top, but rainbow colors when you do want it. But is this keyboard worth the price? Let's get into it. This is a chunky TKL keyboard that strays from the old box on wedge design that we commonly saw in years past. Right away you see the nice PVD airplane above the right arrow, so nice little flourish. I like having smaller and simpler design elements. I don't like other implementations like big knobs and screens that take over like the navigation, which is why you would want to use a TKL keyboard. So something small above the right arrows, or like an LED bar, or maybe just F13 implement. That's my preference. I prefer F12 here over having F13, which is an extra key here and then pushes everything to the left. Although it's consistent in the spacing, I feel like it's a little bit too crowded. And the paper airplane also lights up with RGB. Overall, this board has a blocky aesthetic, but not so chunky as to have a huge forehead or huge chin. The side bezels are thinner than the top and bottom, so it feels a little bit more balanced. It feels a little bit more elegant. Having equal bezels all the way across makes it really feel chunky. Looking around the board, you see a bit of the diffuser. We'll talk about that in a minute when we get into the RGB. The best way to look at the side profile is with the big weight, so let's go ahead and turn on the RGB. So you see that is a box, and the weight itself is helping it stay elevated and makes it look like it's floating. Still primarily a box design, but having it look floating is kind of cool. A little bit concerning because normally having a gap underneath the case makes me think it's going to sound hollow. It's not really the case here, but we'll get into that. You see an intentional seam with the acrylic diffuser across the board, and it's intended to not be a straight line so that it matches the flight path of a paper airplane. Nice touch in my opinion. Overall, it helps it have a unique look without being completely over the top. The back weight itself does not light up, so interestingly enough, if you turn it completely over, it just looks pretty straightforward. This PVD weight here is an upgrade, so if you don't pay for the upgrade, I don't think you're gonna have that full nice reflection that you see right there, but the light is still gonna kick off and shine everything behind the keyboard. So it's still a nice touch, but PVD is recommended in my opinion. The weight overall is large and provides great heft. I'll list the weight on the screen right here. I love the mixed materials with the PVD and the brass. It makes it look more elevated, makes it look more expensive, and it's real nice. And the RGB, gonna increase your FPS, gonna increase your KD ratio. True gamer. There's a ton of LEDs at the bottom. There's a separate PCB just for the RGB, and on the PCB itself for the keyboard, there's RGBs kicking back. There's RGB everywhere, and if you use the polycarbonate plate, you're gonna have RGB spill up even more. So it's just a light show, and you don't have to use it. If you want to be a little bit more refined, a little bit more elegant, turn off the lights and nobody will know that you're a true gamer at heart. So this is the angle you can see from the desk. So you have your little PVD badge here. You have RGB outlining the airplane all the way through. You have RGB in the front. So it's actually really nice because you don't have to flip it over to see the design elements of the board. You can look at it from the side. You can see the angle of the mid piece. You can see that's an interesting board from where you're sitting. You get to enjoy it all the time. It's all too common to see that the keyboard is very boring from the top and the only flair is the brass weight or copper weight at the bottom. Kind of sucks because you don't often flip your keyboard over, right? Going to the rear of the keyboard, unfortunately we have a high USB position. That means you're going to see a lot of the cable and it's going to be floating and it's going to come down right here. Yeah, that's not great, but because it is designed to be floating, you can't have the USB in the weight down here. It's not the thickest weight because it's intended to have an air gap. So they had to put it up here. So if you don't like that, it's going to be a knock against it, but in my opinion, it's worth it to have the floating and the light show. And when you're looking at the top, this is the aluminum plate, so you can't really see too much of the spill. There is a separate PCB beneath the PCB that has only LEDs connected by a ribbon cable, and the main USB is also connected by a ribbon cable. What that PCB is doing is providing all that RGB for the acrylic mid-piece to light up the entire room, right? It looks amazing, just to make sure that you have a great light show. The problem with that is the RGB is kicking up to hit the diffuser, but it's also kind of spilling at the top. With the PC, it's spilling a lot, so it's all along the edge. So if you think that's cheesy, that's unfortunate. It's really gonna be hard to block that unless you start using foams, but who wants to do that, right? I personally do not mind the spill here. I definitely actually prefer the spill with the PC plate having light all around. Gives me kind of like the perky RGB effect, but not as blinding. But that's just my preference. Some people view this as light leak and it's not as clean. Just make your own decision on that. The anodization of this board is very clean. Nothing to complain here. Dude, like, anodization these days is great. The PVD weight is deep, dark, and huge. I think it's well worth the upgrade. Now to the assembly of the keyboard, we have, like I mentioned, ribbon cables. One for the USB-C and one for the PCB at the bottom. You have to install the USB-C connector by yourself because it is a mid-piece that has to be screwed in. This board is designed to be a gasket mount, but it uses a screw to go through it. So because of the acrylic mid-piece, it's kind of complicated. You gotta watch the video. I messed up the first time. Then figured it out, but on the second build of this thing, after I switched out the HMX Machiattos on polycarbonate, I actually broke the ribbon cable for the bottom piece. I was shipped an extra bottom PCB for the RGB. I don't know if that's going to come standard, but be careful with the ribbon cables. I mentioned this before, ribbon cables break easily. Unfortunately, it wasn't even just the ribbon cable, it was the connector, so that entire PCB became a dud. That's not great. Ribbon cables are not great. They're really easy to break, and I wish they wouldn't use them anymore, but for the sake of the RGB, I can kind of make an excuse for it, but ribbon cables, they are my enemy. So yeah, just to wrap up the discussion on the mounting, it's a gasket mount. I thought it'd be more burger mounty like the old Keys boards, but it actually is pretty flexible, even with the aluminum plate here, and I do like it. It's kind of odd, but it works. The bottom PCB that I broke, it's purely for additional RGB, and that's how you get this even perfect glow all the way around the keyboard. It's like super sick in my opinion. I've never seen an acrylic mid-piece pop so much. And for this back piece, there is another array of LEDs, huge LEDs pointing down to hit this acrylic mid-piece to pop out LEDs back there. And on top of that, you got another 2 LEDs up here for the paper airplane. So you got LEDs and RGB everywhere. And this is my favorite implementation of RGB I've seen yet. Once assembled, this thing is a beaut. But definitely watch out for those ribbon cables, seriously. In terms of sound, the first build was with HMX Machiattos on PC plate. That thing was pure ecstasy. No foams, not even any of the porous case foam that was provided, and it sounded heavenly and perfect. I had no qualms about the sound. The gasket sound isn't too overwhelming because it's kind of stiffened by that screw going into the top case and the acrylic mid piece kind of really stabilizing it there, so it's kind of a mix between top mount and gasket. And honestly, there was no hollowness with the HMX Machiattos. To be fair, long poles sound good in most boards. Even boards that are slightly hollow, long poles will fix that. The offsets here were very strong, spacebar also very strong, and I immediately knew that this board was going to be a keeper with the RGB and that sound. Really hard to beat. That's why long poles are so hot right now, especially HMX switches, because they're factory lubed and they're cheap. They're like 30 something cents each switch. Compared to like Gateron switches that are more expensive, they're like the cost of cherry switches, which are the cheapest things because they're kind of old, so you don't have to lube them at all. And they sound great. Not even spring, not even film, nothing. Just throw it into a hotspot board and you're ready to go. I will say that the feel of this board doesn't have as much give as a gasket mount without screws, but the PC plate definitely made it really comfy to type on. It's not the most amazing sounding TKL because once we kind of step back, let's not kind of cheat using a long pole switch. Doing an MX Blacks on aluminum here to really kind of test it. It sounds like an 8 out of 10 in my opinion. It's kind of somewhere between a top mount and a gasket mount, but it's not too sharp to my ears compared to a top mount MX Blacks on aluminum, or even like the Kohaku MX Blacks on aluminum. Not muted, but more pleasing to the ears. I will say though, in my testing, a regular MX Black on aluminum in the spacebar, it's not the best sound. I definitely think you need some kind of long pull in the spacebar, so it's something that helps make it sound better. You don't need a BCP, which is a cherry top, JWK bottom, Novel Keys cream stem or kale stem. You can use any kind of long pull, like, I don't know, Bus and Raws, HMX switches, or you can use something like a Penu. Like, anything will work. So just save one of those switches for the spacebar, in my opinion. And the other thing for this board was that the price point was estimated originally to be $350, but they've been reduced to $299 without the PVD. So remember, the PVD is a little upgrade. The PVD weight upgrade is only $10 actually, so it's actually not that bad. I definitely just go for it. Just consider this a $310 board with the PVD weight. Like, you want that reflection, come on. That looks crazy. Honestly, the price at $350 was pretty decent already, but at $299, it's actually a steal. It competes favorably against the true budget boards like the Neo Keys and the Wuchui boards and the Zooms, you know. But this is much more refined. You got mixed material weight, you got hella LEDs, RGB. You're in good shape. And it doesn't need any foam, so we're moving in the right direction. $300 is probably the cap as to what people are willing to spend on a nice keyboard these days. So even if you don't pay for the upgrade for the PVD weight, you still get a stainless steel weight with the AFP coating to be anti-fingerprint. So you're in good shape. Honestly, I just like the PVD because it's shiny and I'm a child. I think this keyboard is a unique offering in the keyboard space while retaining a familiar layout and feel. There's nothing crazy here like keys being removed for aesthetics or fun trinkets. The paper airplane theme is executed beautifully and elegantly, and the RGB is just a fun factor thrown in my opinion. This is definitely something I'm going to keep in my collection because I've been looking for a red keyboard for a long time. This is their wine unit here, if you were wondering. The wine is beautiful. For those who have been in the game for a while, this is a unique keyboard to buy into. It is affordable enough, and it has RGB, and it looks very different. So it's kind of fun. And if you're newer to the hobby, this is something that just looks great and it sounds great. You're not gonna have a bad sound out of this thing. And $300, why not? But if you have a set budget, that's gonna be your personal decision. I think it's well worth the money for what you get here. Let me know what you think about this board in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.